Hey, this is Branwen, and today I'm talking about Branwen, one of the tales of the Mabinogion, a Welsh legend. First of all, what is the Mabinogi? It's part of the Mabinogion. I made a first initial video on this for the first of the four. I'll put here. Branwen is what we tend to call the second of the four branches. I don't know why we call them kaink, a branch, but that's what we call them. And Branwen is the second tale in this foursome of the Mabinogi, which are different from the main tales. I explained that in the other video. But in this video, I'm talking about the names of this story. What do they mean? Why should we learn about these? Because the names in these stories are different to how people in the English language tell stories. You need to know what the names mean, which give you context for metaphors, jokes, why characters engage with each other in certain ways. So let's jump through and talk about some of those names and what they mean in Welsh to help you build a better appreciation for Welsh and these stories in the Mabinogi now. Branwen ferch Llŷr. This is what we tend to call this story. Now, I should note these stories don't have official names. The scribes which carried these down and passed them down to us, they didn't name them. They just said, here starts this Mabinogi or so on. We named it that because Branwen is the focus of this story. She's the daughter of Llŷr, kind of a sea god figure, but kind of a high king in this case. And her name, Branwen. Bran is crow or raven, and this is key because in Welsh mythology, this is often connected with death, and it's very dark. It's kind of an entry into that other world. Wen is the feminine form of white, fair, just. So that's quite a dualism there, which I find interesting. And she is to marry the King of Ireland in this story, and it's about her journey by and large and sending help to her brother Bendigeidfran fab Llŷr, who is king in this story over here in Britain. In Gwynedd is the seat of his court, and his name is the mirror opposite of hers in reverse. Bran is at the end of his name, that connection to the dark other world, but Bendigeid means blessed, honored, kind of in a spiritual sense, and it comes from Latin bendico, I bless, I praise. And this is interesting as well because there's a Romano-British fusion in his name that doesn't exist in hers, and their names mean the same thing. They're brother and sister, daughters of Llŷr. But he is Romano-British because of his name and king. And she, you have a marriage where you have the Irish king Matholwch, which we're not sure what his name means. In some earlier versions, it's spelled Matholwch. Hey, if you're enjoying this content, tap that like button and thanks. Francesc McCanna, an Irish scholar, has suggested that Matholwch is the version, a British version of the Irish king Miskolfach. And who he is, we just have the vaguest of reference in one of the early Irish sagas, Togal Brudne da Derga, the destruction of Da Derga's hostel, the Red God's hostel. And I don't know if I buy that, but it's quite interesting that there are parallels between that story and Branwen. And it's interesting as well that the time period for that story, Branwen sets in, we're talking like the 2nd century. So if that's the case, that these two stories are kind of related to each other, Branwen ferch Llŷr, this story is really old. And so Matholwch and Branwen are getting married But not everyone's happy with that situation. You have Efnisien and Nisien. You have more of that crossing over again. Because Efnisien, I'm gonna have to break this down for you what his name means in a minute. He disfigures the horses and cuts their ears and lips off to start a fight with the Irish. He's very angry that, no one asked him if Branwen was going to marry Matholwch. He was not happy about it, and he's always picking fights with people. He's kind of like the Loki figure, the mischievous bad seed, poking hostility, brewing it between people for his own amusement in many cases. But his name, Efnisien, that Nis, what it means is close in relationships, close in bond with other people. But Ev today would be Av, which means, Av Llwyddiannus, unsuccessful from Llwyddiannus. It would be Efnisien today, but no one spells it that way. Efnisien, literally the one who is unclose in relationships and hostile. So Nisien, his opposite, means close and dear in human relationships. And the way you can remember this is Nes today, which is the same word traveled through time, means closer. It's just that Nis meant close in relationships, and it changed over time. And today we have the word Gorthnesig, which means stubborn and rebellious, but also a bit of butting heads and not close to people, not congenial with others. Gorthnesig, and that Nis is the same element in this man's name. But there's a turn. Again, that dualism. He throws himself into Paerdadeni, the cauldron of rebirth, to save his people. Later in the story, he redeems himself. That's quite Christian, and I wonder if there's some Christian element that wedged in there over time. But Dadeni, it's the word we use for the Renaissance. A Dadeni, the rebirth. So Branwen goes to Ireland, and she has a son, Gwern, which means alder trees. And this is interesting because it has a second meaning, Gwern. It means wheelbren, which is the modern day word for a ship mast. And in those days, alder wood was that which you built the mast of the ship out of. And there's this travelling back and forth between Britain and Ireland, and that the son of Matholwch and Branwen, his name literally means shipmast. That's kind of weaving in a bond between these two islands, saying that this child is a vessel which connects these two. I find that really interesting. And she's mistreated, Branwen, in Ireland, and abused, and she sends a bird back over the sea, which she trains. It's a very beautiful scene. Back to her brother, Bendigeidfran. I should note there is another character, Mabinogion, involved in this story, but he's such a key character in the next tale of the Mabinogi that we'll save him for that time. And Bendigeidfran, along with Efnisien and others, cross the Irish Sea, and there's a lot of kerfuffle and fighting, and the population of Ireland is decimated, and the destruction from the Paerdadeni, and only a handful make it back to Britain, and Branwen's heart bursts from all this that she feels she's caused, and she dies. they come back, they come to Harlech, which that's the older version of Harlech.
These are uncertain clouds now mooring, swift as winter torrents roaring, not in vain the voice imploring goes on Harlech men.
And they're aware of the ill fate that has happened in their absence. Back in Britain, things have changed since they left and went to Ireland, because Bendigeidfran left people in charge in Britain, Caradog. And Caradog, his name stems from Caradog, who is the character Caraticus, who led the resistance against Rome when Rome invaded. And if you want to learn about Caraticus or Caradog, I made a video about how he led the resistance against Rome. I'll put it here. When they had come back from Ireland, Cyswallon fab Beli had conquered Britain, had taken the kingdom. And Cyswallon fab Beli is interesting because there was a man named Cassivellaunus who fought Julius Caesar when he came to Britain. His mythological ancestor was Belimaur, kind of a father god figure. And so there's this harking back in this story to this mythological past, but they're not really saying it in any fine word because there's this Christian narrative on top, but it's there. And things have gone terribly wrong in this story, that these figures have been turned and upside down. Britain, Ireland, you have Evnisian, Anisian, Bendigeidfran, Branwen, dualism there. And I think it's this element that has made Branwen ferch Llŷr the story in the Mabinogi that people tend to be most familiar with. It resonates with a deep historical narrative of those conflicts in a semi-prehistory with Cyswallon fab Beli. And they travel south, they go to Pembro, and they lose themselves in drink and lose their woes for 7 years. They find this place overlooking the sea, and it becomes a paradise, kind of an Elysium of lost memories. They don't remember any of their sadness. But there's this door looking out upon Aberhenfelen and Cernyw, Cornwall, beyond. And they're warned that if they open that door, all their woes and troubles will come back to them. And there's a man. His name is Halen ap Gwyn. Literally, Halen means cup-bearer, waiter, one who brings and fills drink. Son of White, Gwyn. And he lets out the exclamation, Myfil fy marf, meaning, shame upon my beard. Shame upon my beard, if I do not open the door, know that which is true said concerning it. It's a very apple in the Garden of Eden moment. Halen ap Gwyn is tempted to open this door, and I think it's ironic that this man, the cupbearer, opens the door, and they must drink from their own sorrow and come back to the world in which they are in, and all their woes and problems return to them after many years lost in this paradise of drink and song. I didn't go too deep into the plot there because I want you to enjoy the story. I just want you to be able to read Branwen ferch Llŷr and understand what the names mean and some of their significances to better appreciate the story. Hey, diolch yn fawr am wylio, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you next time.